Hello, beautiful watchers. We have known each other many years. I have read the books and watched the films for you. But now you come to me and you say, Dom, give me the parody that everyone is going to expect from you when you review The Godfather. But you do not ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me the Dom. So I say to you, okay, but we're going to get it out of the way early on so I can drop out a slightly racist accent before it stops being funny. Welcome to Lost in Adaptation. This is The Godfather.
As usual, yeah, I'm keeping the suit on because I look fucking amazing in it. As usual, let's start with me talking about the book itself. Written by Italian-American author Mario Puzo and published in 1969, The Godfather is considered one of the most definitive organised crime novels of all time. The book is written in a style similar to what I described when I was reviewing Tom Clancy's books, not restricting itself to any one narrator or perspective, but rather regularly switching between characters throughout. Almost all of the cast got at least some part of the story told from their perspective, though Vito and Michael Corleone, Tom Hagen, and Johnny Fontaine probably enjoy the most attention overall. This does leave the book with a similar issue to Clancy's work in that it suffers from a mild case of no main characteritis. You could still make a case for it ultimately being Michael's story, but he's just not in enough of it for that to be definite. It is overall a good book and a surprisingly relaxing read despite the amount of violence and murder in it. However, if I were to make a complaint, it would be that it's a very, very long book and it most definitely doesn't need to be. There are so many tangents in this book that advance neither the plot nor the development of the characters. Spoiler warning, the film only adapted about half of it and it's still 2.5 hours long, so that should give you an idea of how cumbersome this novel feels at times. I've been doing a lot of flying recently, the consequence of dating an American, so I was actually grateful I had a tome to get through, but in other circumstances, I predict this might have been one of those books that I read in bursts over a period of several months. The danger of that, of course, being that I might get distracted and never finish it. Actually, I do have at least one more issue with it. It's a bit of a touchy subject, I'm afraid. Just a heads up, women are not treated great in this book. I genuinely don't have time to cite all the myriad of examples, but I assure you they are all without fail either objectified, villainized, victimized, or patronized throughout. I don't know if this is indicative of the author's actual personal beliefs, or just a commitment to realistically representing the mindset of an organization that is literally a patriarchy and very conservative even for the 1940s. Either way, it's not massively fun to read about. Well, now everyone's feeling slightly awkward, let's move on to the film. The book's success and the author's apparent enthusiasm to adapt it to screen led to the release of the film a mere 3 years later in 1972. And the director, Francis Ford Coppola, was already widely respected in Hollywood, but The Godfather's overwhelmingly positive critical reception earned him a reputation for being one of the greatest directors to ever live. The Godfather has got to be amongst the most quoted and parodied movies of all time. Even if you haven't seen 1 second of it, I guarantee you'll know at least a few lines from it. One of the most impressive things about it is that it not only has one of the best scores of all time and uses it effectively throughout, it's also very clever when it chooses not to use it, letting scenes and tension build on little more than the passion of the actors and ingenious use of background noise. Speaking of the actors, I mean, yeah, Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Abe Vigoda, Robert Duvall, just to name a few. If you melted down all the Academy Awards the cast of The Godfather have collectively amassed over the years, you could probably make a very shiny life-size replica of the Titanic. The American Film Institute has deemed it the second greatest film of all time, surpassed only by Citizen Kane, and I personally think it fully deserves that high regard. I have to admit though, that I didn't always. I think I must have been about 13 when I tried watching this film for the first time, and I quickly grew bored and changed the channel. It wasn't till I was in my 20s and studying film at university that I developed a stronger appreciation for what an achievement in filmmaking it was. What I'm trying to say is The Godfather has earned its praises, being the end result of a great story being used by a legendary film director employing legendary actors, but no matter what anyone tells you, there's nothing wrong with you if you haven't bothered seeing it or don't see what all the fuss was about. It's not for everyone. Right then, while the League of Snooty Film Critics furiously search through our bylaws to see if that's something I'm allowed to say, let's talk adaptation. Judging by his depiction of Hollywood and everyone from there in this book, I suspect Puzo has a somewhat low opinion of the place. However, if that is true, it didn't stop him from writing the screenplay and working closely with Coppola throughout the production. Unlike others in the same position I've discussed recently, it appears Puzo felt absolutely no desire to rewrite his story at all. Enough people in the survey have not seen the film that I would have felt inclined to give a quick synopsis of it before the comparison. However, luckily for me, the film is so loyal to the parts of the book it adapted that this section will easily double up as one. Yay! Justified laziness. The wedding of the Don's daughter and the multiple people who came to him with favours, hoping to take advantage of the old Sicilian tradition of a man being unable to refuse a request on the day of his daughter's wedding. I should mention, I got the impression in both the book and the film that if the Don had genuinely felt inclined to do so, he probably would have ignored that tradition. Nobody forces Vito Corleone to do anything ever. The most significant of these supplicants were an Italian undertaker whose daughter had been assaulted by two Americans and had been let down by the courts asking for the Don to give him justice, and the Don's godson, Johnny Fontaine, a famous singer trying to break into acting whose career was being hamstrung by a powerful director. Tom Hagen's trip to California, his attempts to negotiate with the director failing because he was harbouring a personal grudge against Fontaine for stealing one of his girls, and the oh-so-famous scene where the director found the head of his prized racing horse in his bed as a result. Michael, the most estranged of the Godfather's sons, trying to gently break it to his fiancée Kay that his family were the most powerful organised crime syndicate in New York. Sollazzo, a minor crime boss and drug dealer known as the Turk, who had the backing of the Tartaglia family, the second most powerful group in New York, approaching Don Corleone and trying to get his help with the new blossoming narcotics trade. The Don refusing on the logical grounds that a lot of his political influence, the judges, senators and police chiefs that he had on his payroll, depended on him sticking to the kind of crime that wouldn't damage society, like gambling and smuggling. Unfortunately, the Don's eldest son Santino, also known as Sonny, spoke out of turn during the meeting and accidentally tipped off Sollazzo that he would be in favour of such a deal, resulting in the Turk attempting to kill Vito in the hopes that Sonny would inherit the business and be forced, in the light of his family's vastly weakened power, to give him the cooperation he needed. The Don had tried to get a spy inside the Tartaglia's operation by sending his most fanatically loyal enforcer, a giant man by the name of Luca Brasi, to get a job with them, but they had gotten wise to his ruse and had him killed. Sollazzo's plan fails though, as Vito somehow survives the 5 bullets they put in him, and Sonny is able to maintain most of their power and is filled with righteous fury. Even Michael, the only member of the family who hitherto had shown no interest in getting involved in the family business, was stirred to lend his assistance, which is fortunate because he happened to visit his father in hospital just as the Tartaglias were attempting to finish the job, employing a corrupted police chief to remove all the officers and bodyguards protecting him. Michael is able to bluff scare the assassins off, but gets his jaw shattered by the enraged police chief as a result, deforming his otherwise handsome face. This and the renewed attempt on his father's life is enough to fully commit him to the family business, and he volunteers to be the one to kill Sollazzo and the police chief, going into hiding with his father's allies in Sicily right afterwards. Killing a policeman is of course a big no-no even for the mafia, so all the crime families in New York face a harsh crackdown while simultaneously going to war with each other. While the Don recovers, Sonny struggles to run the business. He also discovers that his sister's new husband has been physically abusing her and beats the piss out of him for it. After discovering that this had not impeded the vile bastard for long, Sonny leaves the protection of his bodyguards to defend his sister and is ambushed and killed at a toll booth en route. The Don, gaining enough health back to take over again, calls a halt to the war and agrees not to take revenge for the death of his son as long as Michael is allowed to return home safely. Meanwhile, Michael, while hiding out in Sicily, falls hopelessly in love with a younger woman named Apollonia and manages, through perseverance and respect, to win the approval of her family. They get married and are pretty damn happy, but unfortunately she's killed by one of his traitorous bodyguards in an attempt on his life. When he gets back to New York, Michael, possibly suffering from the world's worst case of rebound, gets back together with his original American fiancée. Vito claims to be retiring and handing the family business over to Michael. Michael seems to be running the business quite passively, trying to distance himself from the criminal element and go legit, allowing the other families to gain power and moving his interest to Las Vegas and the budding casino business. This meets resistance from Mo Green, the man currently running the casinos and hotels, not very skillfully in that area. To make matters worse, the Godfather dies suddenly of a heart attack. As everyone thought most of the Corleone family's power depended on his personal influence, reputation and contacts, this seems seems to put Michael in an even more precarious position. This perceived weakness and the apparent inevitability of defeat inclines one of the Don's most trusted advisors to switch sides and try to set Michael up for assassination. However, it turns out that Michael and his father had formed a master plan together all along and were just biding their time, transferring all of the father's political contacts to the son. Michael proceeds to wipe out the heads of all the other families in a single masterstroke of mass violence and murder. For good measure, he also kills the troublesome Las Vegas bigwig, the turncoat advisor, and his sister's husband, who it turns out was paid to beat his wife specifically to lure Santino out into the open to be killed. With his enemies in shambles and his own reputation made, the story ends with Michael Corleone as the now undisputed head of the most powerful mafia family in the world. Unlike other films I've covered that have a bad habit of including things from the book without sufficient explanation, resulting in new film-only plot holes forming, The Godfather never forgets to include the cause as well as the effect. In addition to the plot, there's figuratively tons of little book details the film adhered to fanatically. The chief advisors to the mafia dons being known as consiglieres, traditionally a position held by Sicilians, though Don Corleone had allowed Tom Hagen, a man of German-Irish descent, to fill the role despite the backlash to his reputation because of Tom's loyalty and intelligence. You see, Tom was a homeless orphan boy that Santino befriended. Vito chose to take him in and pay for his education. Once Tom became a lawyer, he asked to work for Vito to try and pay him back for all his kindness. Enzo, the baker's future son-in-law, who Don Corleone had helped escape deportation, turning up at the hospital during the second assassination attempt and offering to help in gratitude. I was really impressed that they kept this. It was a good way of showing how the Godfather's policy of showing everyone respect despite their station in life and building up favours could really pay off. Fredo, the middle child, going into shock after his father was shot and being sent off to Las Vegas to get him out of the action while he recovered, resulting in him going a bit native and becoming their local boss's lackey. The Corleones removing the facilitator of the attempted assassination by tricking him into driving out into a field and then shooting him in the back of the head. Sollozzo's car pulling a 180 on the bridge to try to throw off pursuers. Sicilian peasants referring to love at first sight as being struck by the thunderbolt. Carlo, Sonny's abusive brother-in-law, clinging to the railings and not defending himself when he was attacked. It's important because this is what stops Sonny from killing him. Despite his famous temper, Santino could never bring himself to kill a helpless victim. Also accurate was Carlo's later garroting in the car as punishment for arranging Sonny's death. Apparently, in addition to the double-barreled shotgun, the garrote was the famous Sicilian weapon of choice. Sal, the intelligent but ultimately disloyal consigliere, instantly understanding that he'd been found out as a traitor and calmly accepting that he was a dead man walking.
Loyalty to book dialogue is always a bit tricky. The phrase "sounds good on paper" is never more relevant than when you try acting out a scene from the book out loud and find out that what seemed fine before, without the accompanying thoughts and descriptions you're privy to in novel form, suddenly sounds about as natural as a porn star's breasts.
Most films, or at least the competent ones anyway, will cut large amounts of dialogue or change it drastically to make it easier for the actors. What's especially impressive about The Godfather, and this is a testament to the phenomenal skill of the actors and director, is how natural they make the conversation sound without deviating from how it was written in the book. Brando in particular had to say entire paragraphs of dialogue that should have sounded ridiculously overblown and cheesy, and almost certainly would have in the hands of any lesser actor, yet somehow he makes every word sound like it's coming from the heart. The rest of the cast do a great job in regards to this too, especially when it comes to their book-described interactions with each other. Sometimes you even get an entire room talking over each other like you would in real life, but if you listen carefully you realise they're all still quoting directly from the novel. It's a really nice touch. You may be pleased to know that all the before-mentioned hyper-quotable lines are book loyal as well.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Don't ask me about my business, Kate.
One of the fundamental differences between the way the story is told in the book and the way it's told in the film is the book was not always chronological in its narration. Events like Sonny's death started with his body being brought to the mortuary with the reveal that it was him under the blanket being a big surprise twist, then went back and explained how it happened. The book also didn't reveal what Michael had been getting up to in Sicily until after he was on his way back, his father had recovered, and the mafia war between the Corleone Empire and the five families was called off. I mention this simply as a fact of interest, not a criticism of the film. This is one of those things that works well in a book, but would be confusing and unnecessary in a movie. Kay is possibly a little hard done by in the film. While she was so helplessly in love with Michael, she tended to ignore common sense. She didn't come off as quite as needy or naive originally. Even though, admittedly, it was her who made contact with him after he came back to America, not vice versa. You also don't quite get the same sense of her intelligence in the film, as she was quite a bright young lady in the book. None of these changes are massively extravagant though. She's still basically the same character, she's just not given an enough screen time to develop. She probably has the relatively best portrayal of all the women in the book, even if she does end up as a meek housewife and baby-making machine at the end. Depending on your interpretation of the last shot of the film, you could consider the ending a change. Specifically, if you thought that Kay believed Michael when he denied killing all his enemies and his brother-in-law. The book makes it clear that Kay immediately figured out that Michael was lying to her in the end, and even went as far as to leave him for a while before being talked into returning by Tom Hagen. The very last few pages of the book explain that Kay eventually dealt with the stress of being married to a cold-blooded killer by becoming a devout Catholic like Michael's mother, and praying for his soul at church every single morning. The film seems to imply that Vito died instantly when he collapsed. In the book, he lives long enough for several people to run to his side, including Michael. With his last breath, he told his son that life is so beautiful, which, while open to interpretation, could mean that despite everything, the Godfather was quite satisfied and happy with his life as it ended. There was a whole chapter in the novel given over to the backstory of Vito Corleone, involving the murder of his father, his immigration to America, his descent into crime, and how he built his empire. Its omission in this film is understandable and ultimately proved to be immensely fortuitous, as it meant they could include it in The Godfather Part 2, a movie hailed as one of the very few sequels to critically acclaimed works of cinema that actually outdid its predecessor. As I hope I've made clear, of the parts of the book the film decided to keep, they tried their best to stay meticulously loyal to it. But even within this section, there were a few things here and there that the film just could not accommodate that gave you a better idea of just what a mastermind and unusual man Vito Corleone was. A random example being the FBI's attempts to make a note of all the attendees at the wedding was pointless because the Godfather had predicted their arrival and warned all his friends not to come in their own cars. One character I feel could have been expanded on a bit more in the film was Luca Brasi. You only see him being socially awkward at the wedding, then getting assassinated by the Tattaglia family, both of which is true to the book. They also remembered to play up his fanatical loyalty to the Don. However, what they really didn't go into was his other two defining attributes, namely that he was an almost unstoppable killing machine when he wasn't being caught off guard, obviously, and he was pure fucking evil. Discounting stories intentionally written to be dark and disturbing, in all my years of reading, only two scenes described in books have ever truly shaken me. The first was the mutilation of the spider in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and the other is what Luca Brasi did in The Godfather. Quite a while after Luca's assassination, while Michael was hiding in Sicily, an elderly woman working as a servant for the local Don asked him if Luca really was dead, and rejoiced when he confirmed he was. Under questioning, she revealed she used to work as a midwife in America and had been forcibly taken by Luca's men in the middle of the night to help a young woman give birth in his apartment. After the young baby girl was born, Luca confirmed he was the father. Then he forced the midwife, on pain of death, to take the baby into the basement and throw it into the furnace. A few weeks later, he apparently decided to murder the mother as well. Yeah, I have to say I felt a bit differently about seeing Luca's death in the film after that. Okay, moving on to the real meat of the episode. Arguably, the biggest omission of the entire film was the vast amount of the book given over to Johnny Fontaine, his struggle with his personal life and his career in music and films. His appeal to his godfather for help at the start and Hagen's stunt with the horse's head was only a small part of a much larger, but ultimately not very exciting, role for Fontaine. The book tells of how he left his first wife and married a young famous actress, only to find out she was a serial adulterer and gave no shits about him. Of course, he did the same thing, but the book treats that as perfectly acceptable because he's a man. After Vito guaranteed his godson's big break into acting, he also payrolled a bunch of movies for Fontaine to produce himself, advancing Fontaine's personal wealth and career and spearheading Don Corleone's extension of his criminal empire into California. Fontaine's struggle with depression over the loss of his singing voice is a major recurring theme in his part of the plot. He also fights a constant battle not to be completely absorbed into the apparently vapid, soulless, lecturous life of Hollywood. I did mention the author seems to have quite a low opinion of the place. A big supporting player in Fontaine's side of the story is Nino Valenti. A childhood friend of Fontaine and the Corleone brothers, Nino had been denied a part in organised crime as the Godfather believed him destined to be an artist, not a mobster. Apparently Vito was quite a big believer in destiny. As part of an attempt to repay his godfather for his kindness, Fontaine invited Nino to Hollywood and tried to make him a big singer and movie star. Having a genuine friend around is great for Fontaine, but Nino doesn't do so well in the story. Because I have no medical training, I could well be talking completely out of my arse, but At a guess, I'd say that Nino either suffered from a bad case of clinical depression or the early stages of schizophrenia, which manifested itself as an extreme apathy for life and everything in it. It affects him so drastically, he gets a blowjob from an A-list celebrity he grew up masturbating to and doesn't give a shit. I mean, there's no metaphor more appropriate than that. Fontaine genuinely tries to help Nino, but can't quite bring himself to have his friend committed to a mental ward despite the urging of a doctor, so Nino quietly succumbs to alcoholism and passes away at the end of the book. Despite his large role in the story, his actual death is barely commented on, which actually makes it sadder. To his credit, Johnny is heartbroken and blames himself for not doing what needed to be done. Aside from that, Fontaine himself gets a happy ending, as a chance encounter with the Doctor, who features more prominently in another part of the story, gets his issues with his voice diagnosed and cured. Plus, he gets a renewed sense of self-worth when he wins an award for acting, even though his Godfather was out of action and unable to put the fix in for him. On top of that, he works out a good relationship with his first ex-wife and his 2 daughters. Basically, he's got everything at the end: a happy personal life, a huge movie business, and his singing career back. It's just a shame that, despite this character patting himself on the back for not hating women, he is in fact a raving misogynist. Despite how much of the book that Fontaine took up, when you actually stop and consider the effect that anything he did had on the main, more mafia-related story, you realise that his brief interactions that they kept in the film pretty much covered it. I know I don't usually do this, but I kind of endorse their decision to leave Fontaine out of it. The film was long enough already. I have to admit, when I first started reading this book, I wasn't expecting quite so much of the plot to be based around, genitalia.
Godfather, I come up for your help. Only you can.
Come back in a few hours. We're talking about vaginas right now.
Oh, well, I would like to talk about vaginas too.
Great. Pull up a chair.
Okay, I'm sorry, that was vastly misrepresentative. I just really wanted to do that sketch. Let me explain for real. After Fontaine, the biggest character to get all but cut out was Lucy Mancini. Childhood friend of Connie and the maid of honor at her wedding, Lucy lived her entire life in shame of her unusually loose vagina. One of only 2 female characters, and her story arc is based entirely around her ability to have sex. She had it on good authority that Santino was also in possession of an unusually large sex organ. In fact, you would not believe how much of the early book is given over to describing it. Anyway, she snuck off with him during the wedding to have a quick shag. FYI, Santino's wife was apparently well aware of all of his affairs, but actually approved of them because it gave her time away from having to deal with his extraordinary member herself. Lucy, believing that Sonny was the only person in the world for her due to the compatibility of their genitals, became his long-term mistress, and was heartbroken when he was killed. Knowing that Santino had had genuine feelings for her, the family helped her move and set her up with a job in one of their Las Vegas casinos, where she met a handsome young doctor named Jules Segal. Despite being very good at his job, Segal worked for the casino because his name was mud with the medical board because he'd got caught performing abortions. During a sexual encounter, he diagnosed her issue as a perfectly normal medical condition that could be corrected by surgery. The book then describes this surgery in detail. I'm not even kidding. 3 or 4 pages into this description of the doctor working on her vagina, I remember thinking, I'm pretty sure this book is supposed to be about the mafia, isn't it? No? Still describing vaginal surgery, huh? Okay, I'll wait. Lucy also has a happy ending, as she and the doctor get married after her condition was resolved. Segal was also the one who realised that Fontaine's vocal issue might be curable on the occasion that their stories overlapped, and he was the one that predicted that the only way to save Nino from himself was to have him fully committed. Lucy's extreme lack of screen time was capitalised on later in The Godfather Part 3, where they rewrote it so that she was impregnated during the wedding and gave birth to Santino's illegitimate son Vincent, who later got involved in that whole incest story arc. You'll remember, I assume, my comments on the poor treatment of women in this book. Well, what's most unsettling about it is just how accepted it was by all the characters. You don't see this in the film, but the first time that Connie was assaulted by her husband when he was taking her bridal purse off her to spend on booze and gambling, she went to her parents for help. Despite having been a loving father, Vito showed no interest in her black eye, as far as he was concerned, husbands were perfectly entitled to beat their wives, and this was none of his business. When asked if he had ever struck his wife, her mother proudly advised that she had simply never given him a reason to. Her subsequent requests for help in getting a divorce were completely ignored by all. With this mindset, Sonny's defense of Connie was seen as a grievous and unacceptable faux pas. The Don was livid with him for trying to stop his sister from getting abused. One of the before-mentioned flaws in the book that led to it dragging in places was its refusal to let any character pass by without explaining their entire backstory. The reader is treated to a fascinating chapter about a day in the life of the Undertaker, including a tangent about how he'd had the front of his funeral parlour remodeled to make it more accessible to the elderly, and how the previous owner had instead used a service elevator to get them inside. Hell, the fake cop who assassinated some of the rival dons at the end gets the better part of a chapter explaining his entire freaking life! It was figuratively the last few pages of the book, and it was bringing in an entirely new character. It was bizarre! This was kind of a no-brainer when it came to cutting it out. The film made the incredibly logical decision to just show his contributions to the plot. Apparently lost to the deleted scenes is Vito visiting his dying consigliere on his daughter's wedding day. In the delirium of the final hours of a year-long battle with cancer, the man asks the Godfather to save him from dying, believing the Don had become so powerful even death himself would be afraid of him. If you felt a smidgen of pity for the film director and his rude awakening, please don't bother. He's a paedophile in the book. Women bring their preteen daughters to his secluded villa to be abused by him in exchange for film opportunities. Also not in the film due to when it ended is Michael's sister having a complete turnaround, apologising to her brother for accusing him of killing Carlo. Whether she really was just that gullible, choosing to live in denial, or maybe finding that she was enjoying life a lot more now that she wasn't having the piss beaten out of her by a vile dickhead, isn't confirmed. She gets remarried within a year and is much happier. The Don's wife, Carmilla, plays a slightly larger role in the book, taking Kay under her wing several times in the story, though she never gets too involved in the men's work as she seems happy with her role as a meek housewife. Michael eventually tracked down Fabrizio, the bodyguard who tried to kill him but only got poor Apollonia instead, and has him killed at the end of the book. Apparently feeling no desire to do anything as dramatic as do it himself, he just sends one of his goons around to shoot him in the chest. The book made several references to real-life gangster Al Capone and his Chicago mafia being left out of all the major meetings. Apparently he was far too uncivilized and way too keen on media attention, making him the black sheep of organised crime that no one wanted to be associated with.
The Doms. Final thoughts. While the film's choice to cut out so much of the book does cost it points for accuracy, we've seen in the past how being too obsessed with keeping every detail can lead to its own set of problems. With so little overlap between the main and the subplots, the Godfather film was in a somewhat unique position of being able to drop them with almost zero consequences or need to change the remaining story. Whether it was Puzo himself who realised there was just too much fluff in the book, or Coppola who talked him into it, it was a very wise decision to just stick to the main story, but stick to it very, very loyally. This solved the issue of there not being a clear lead, as Michael and his journey to becoming a crime boss now dominates the story. Although a side effect of this is it now seems a little strange in the film when he disappears for long stretches, it does help it keep a more cohesive narrative than the book could boast. All in all, I'd say this was one of my new favourite examples of an adaptation done just right, taking the best bits of the book and hiring a perfect cast and crew to bring them to screen. Oh hey Bob, what's up? Well, I've just been contacted by the League of Snooty Film Critics. Apparently the answer is no, you're not allowed to tell people it's okay to not like The Godfather. I'm afraid we're gonna have to go for a little ride. Oh. Hey, can you get me off the hook, Bob? For old time's sake? Can't do it, the Dom. Ah. Well, goodbye, beautiful watchers, it's been fun. So, is it at least painless? Not from what I hear, sorry.
The Dom, the League of Snooty Film Critics is shocked and appalled by your transgression. You are always the snootiest of us, able to use the most basic information to sound like you think you're the smartest person in the room, which is why your betrayal cannot be tolerated. Are you ready to face your punishment?
I am. Do your worst, you smug gits.
Very well.
No. No, 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 no!
Hey beautiful watchers, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that there's a variety of rewards you can earn by becoming a Patreon, including early access to all videos, getting to be a part of the survey about how many people saw the film and read the book, or playing Minecraft with me on my 24-hour server. Higher level contributors can also join the Dom Skype chat room, and best of all, choose future episodes of Lost in Adaptation. However, if right now you are thinking, my goodness the Dom, I can't do that, all of my currency recently became self-aware and told me it loved me, I have not had the heart to spend any of it since then. Fear not, if you would instead be willing to like, share, subscribe, or a combination of all three, that goes a long way towards helping my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. Have a most pleasant day, and I will see you soon.
I would have preferred Bulbasaur, but he's too green for the screen.